I had my first kissing scene with N. Harrison, and, yes, it was the big kissing scene. It took a few takes to get it right. I personally find that, I do better just being myself. But I'll tell you, whatever I do, turns out sort of funny, right? I'm not taken very seriously by people. The fisherman believed he had discovered a drifting net bag, but it turned out to be a woman who was still clothed, had her eyes gently closed, and had not been reported missing. The date was January 14, 1985. Carol Wayne, an American television icon who once made the whole country laugh on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show, was found dead in a tiny bay near Manzano, Mexico. No drugs in her system, no injuries, and no one knew why she was there alone. She had gotten into a fight with her partner and left the hotel 3 days prior. That man carried her things to the airport, boarded a plane back to the U.S., and never returned. No missing person report, no search attempt. No one even spoke her name. Carol Wayne disappeared as if she had never been there. And it is the most frightening aspect. How could a lady who appeared on national television over 100 times, who epitomized America's smile, die in such silence? How could a seductive, witty figure, once the center of the spotlight, be abandoned like a mystery no one wanted to solve? You will travel through the darkest corners of Hollywood on this adventure. A stolen childhood, a warped career, a questioned role as a mother, and a death that has never been properly addressed. If you ever believed unexplained deaths only happened in movies, the story of Carol Wayne will make you think again. Carol Wayne was born in 1942 in Chicago, a chilly place where dreams were sometimes buried behind thick snow and the rigid demands of parents. For Carol, there was no room for choice at the beginning. Her mother forced her into ballet school when she was just 3 years old. By the age of 6, she and her younger sister, Nena, were enrolled in figure skating classes. Mornings began around 5:00 a.m. The demanding schedule prevented her from being a typical youngster, and training continued late into the night. While other kids played and completed their homework, Carol bent her body to the rhythm of music, glided over the ice as if her entire life had one sole objective: to perform. But the most frightening thing wasn't the exhaustion. It was because no one had ever asked her, "Do you want to do this?" She lived a controlled childhood in which everyone's dreams belonged to someone else. Just as she entered puberty, Carol and Nina were recruited into the Ice Capades, a popular touring ice show at the time. The circumstance: quit school, get out on the road, and start performing professionally right away. Tour schedules, cosmetics kits, and many nights on stage. No youth, no diploma. In a rare interview, Carol once said, "We were two beautiful girls with no education, nothing else to do." It wasn't a complaint. It was a chilling confession, as if she had realized too early that her life had no way back. Things seemed to brighten when she toured across America, but during one performance, Carol slipped on the ice. A coin tossed by a spectator knocked her skate off course. The fall tore open her knee, leaving a 5-inch scar. and more importantly, ended forever. The dream of professional skating she never chose, but had clung to her whole childhood. When the wound healed, she had no stage left to return to, no education, no backup career, no direction forward. Carol and Nina fell into a void, trapped between a forced past and an uncertain future. Carol Wayne and her sister Nina chose Las Vegas because there was nowhere else to go, not because they were passionate about the spotlight. At that point, all they had were their looks, a little performance skill, and an unidentified longing. Las Vegas in the 1960s was not a place for girls looking for peace, but it was perfect for those who needed to be seen. They became showgirls at the Tropicana, a job that was glamorous on the outside but quiet on the inside. Carol immediately attracted attention with her bombshell figure and striking presence. But no one ever inquired about the childhood years taken from her or the long scar on her knee. One day, at a party in Los Angeles, a man approached Carol and said, "We're looking for a girl like you." She was skeptical, like so many other women who had heard similar vague promises. But the next morning, she still went to the audition. And for the first time, Carol Wayne stood in front of a camera, not to perform under someone's command, but to try becoming someone else on her own terms. She landed her first role, then a second, and before long, Carol began appearing in hit television series of the time, like I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, The Man from UNLE. The roles were usually the same: blonde, sexy, a little ditzy, the kind of character Hollywood adored back then. She understood that, and she didn't complain. In an interview, Carol once joked, "I got all the roles the moment I got this chest." The audience laughed. But for Carol, it was a knowing smile in the face of tragedy. She was being defined by her body. Every role that came her way was the same: pretty, charming, and never allowed to be smarter than the script. But what no one expected was this: that very familiarity would catapult her to fame. In 1967, Carol received a call from NBC. Johnny Carson wanted to test her for a new comedy sketch on The Tonight Show. The sketch was called Art Fern's Tea Time Movie, and her role was the Matenia Lady. No one could have guessed that just a few minutes of screen time each week in a comedy bit would make Carol Wayne one of the most beloved faces in America for over a decade. But right then, just as the spotlight began to blaze, she stepped into the biggest role of her life. A woman imprisoned by the image the public had created for her. From the late 1960s to the early 1980s, every Friday night, millions of Americans tuned in to watch The Tonight Show. And whenever Johnny Carson's character, Art Fern, walked on stage, he was never alone. By his side was always a blonde woman in a short dress, with a provocative bust line and wide, puzzled eyes, as if she misunderstood everything. That was Carol Wayne, the Matenia Lady. She didn't have many lines. Sometimes she just smiled or raised an eyebrow. But every movement Carol made became her signature. People didn't love her for the depth of her character. They loved her for the sweetness, allure, and the comfort she brought. She became a part of American rhythm, familiar, pleasant, uncomplicated. Success came fast and flourished. Carol became a frequent guest on game shows like Celebrity Sweepstakes, Hollywood Squares, and various comedy programs. Her image was everywhere: magazines, postcards, wall calendars, the double entendres, the suggestive leans. Everything made the audience laugh and remember. But behind the scenes, Carol realized she was imprisoned. She reportedly admitted, "I studied acting, I read books, I auditioned like everyone else." However, no one was interested in my opinions. They merely wanted to see how I appeared. Despite her career's seeming success, it was actually a one-way street. The more well-known she became, the more difficult it was to overcome the perception that television had given her. Producers only saw her as the perfect bimbo, beautiful, naive, and never demanding depth. The audience adored her, but didn't want her to change. There were rumors of an intimate relationship between her and Johnny Carson, the most powerful TV host in America at the time. They denied it, but in a rare response to the press, Carol smiled. "He loved me. I loved him. We understood each other. He still sees me every night in his dreams." No one knew if she was joking or telling the truth. But one thing was obvious. Carson maintained a peculiar regard for her, and after her death, he ceased using the Art Fern character for over a year as a modest memorial. While the public kept laughing at her appearances, few knew Carol was trying to change her destiny. She took on more serious supporting roles, auditioned for films, and turned down overly suggestive offers. But Hollywood does not forgive reinvention. And when NBC decided to shorten The Tonight Show from 90 minutes to 60, the Matinee Lady was among the first parts cut. And with those few lost minutes of screen time, Carol Wayne gradually disappeared from Hollywood. Fame is sometimes a trap with no exit. Carol Wayne once had everything: the love of the audience, the glow of television lights on her face every week. But behind that smile was a personal life shattered, torn apart, piece by piece. And unlike her fleeting roles, true tragedy doesn't end gently. She was married 3 times, and all 3 ended in heartbreak. Her first marriage, to Loretto Larry Sarah, happened just as Carol was rising to fame. They divorced after exactly 2 years. When later asked about it, Carol gave a bittersweet smile. "Skating taught me to be flexible, but marriage really taught me how to bend." It was a kind of self-defense, humorous on the outside, but within was a woman learning to survive by pretending everything was fine. Her second husband, Barry Feinstein, was a renowned photographer who had worked with Bob Dylan, George Harrison, and Janis Joplin. They had 1 son together, Alex. In those early years with Feinstein, Carol thought she had found a quiet corner of peace. But Hollywood's lights never dimmed long enough for a woman like her to rest. Juggling motherhood, filming, and maintaining a flawless, sexy image, Carol began to burn out. Feinstein left when their son was still young. No goodbye, no explanation, no looking back. Carol became a single mother, a role no audience ever saw, no camera ever captured. Yet, it was the heaviest role she ever played. She married a 3rd time to television producer Burt Sugarman, the man who helped her retain a few small parts on game shows. But like the men before him, he didn't stay when her career lost its shine. The marriage ended in 1980 when her role as a matinee lady was eliminated from The Tonight Show. A few months later, Carol lost her job, her social status, the last man in her life, and the feeling that she was still a part of the industry she had once called home. That's when the real decline started, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. Some sources say it was Alex, then a student at Beverly Hills High School, who first handed her a clove cigarette. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was an innocent gesture from a child wanting to share something with his mother. But that fragrant, sweet smoke opened a door Carol would never step back through. From clothes to alcohol, from alcohol to tranquilizers, then to cocaine. It all happened within a few years. But the most heartbreaking part was this: no one stepped into her life in time to stop it. No manager, no close friends, no producers, no audience. Her career slipped away like water through fingers. The roles dried up. The phone stopped ringing. Carol started appearing on cheap comedy shows, second-tier talk shows, places where people still called her matinee lady, as if she had never aged, never changed. In actuality, however, Carol was a middle-aged woman who was unemployed, in debt, and gradually forgotten. In 1984, she filed for bankruptcy, claiming she had no income, no assets, no job, and no outstanding contracts due to financial strain. $0 was the figure on the petition filed with the court. That same year, she made a desperate decision. She posed nude for Playboy, not because she wanted to, not to assert female empowerment, but because it was the only thing this industry had ever paid her well for: her body. The photos were bold, not the classic Playboy style, but they didn't receive the acclaim she had hoped for. They didn't revive her career. They only deepened her heartbreak and despair, because even she knew deep down that in the end, she still wasn't seen as a woman with depth, ambition, or inner worth, just a faded icon. And when there was nothing left to lose, she received an unusual offer. Richard Pryor, the comedy legend who was also battling addiction, offered to help her get clean. He promised to cover the full cost of treatment and said he'd give her a role in his new film if she came back sober and clear-headed. Carol agreed, but that promise, like so many in her life, came too late. In early 1985, Carol Wayne left Los Angeles for a getaway in Mexico. No press, no filming schedule, no plans for any upcoming projects. She arrived at Losadas Resort, a renowned retreat in Manzano, with Edward Durston, a man in the entertainment industry known not for his talent, but for his shadowy associations. Some close to her said that trip was a way for her to retreat, to rinse off the pain before starting over. Others thought it was a vacation, a pause before a comeback. No one knew it would be the last trip of her life. The nature of their relationship, whether they were friends, lovers, or just someone Carol clung to during a vulnerable moment, was unknown. But Durston was the last person to see her alive. Over time, that detail became the biggest fissure in the entire narrative. The two were supposed to return to the U.S. on January 10, but for reasons never clearly explained, they missed their flight. Losadas was fully booked, so they moved to Playa de Santiago, a small, old, and gloomy hotel. It was an unworthy place for someone who had once been a national star. Carol was furious. Hotel staff recalled that when they arrived, she refused to enter the room, standing outside in silent anger, while Durston and a bellboy carried the luggage in. When Durst went back to find her a while later, she was gone. What surprised everyone was that he didn't call the police, didn't search for her, and didn't tell anyone. Instead, he stayed at another hotel. The following morning he left Mexico, taking Carol's luggage with him, and told the airport staff, "She'll be coming later to claim it." Carol Wayne never showed up. 3 days later, on January 13th, a fisherman discovered her body floating face down in the shallow waters of Manzano Bay. She was still fully clothed, no wounds, no alcohol or drugs in her system. According to the forensic report, time of death was estimated to be 36 to 48 hours earlier, almost immediately after she vanished from the hotel. So, what happened? Some believe she slipped and fell while walking along the shore, but the water was only waist deep. Others speculate suicide, but there was no note, no signs she had prepared for such an act. She had come to Mexico with hope for a new beginning, bringing clothes, belongings, and a passport. Not the actions of someone ready to end it all. Suspicion began to turn toward Edward Durston, the man who not only left her behind, but also took her luggage after she went missing. But the more chilling detail, this wasn't the first time he had been linked to a mysterious death. In 1969, Diane Linkletter, the daughter of TV host Art Linkletter, died under unclear circumstances after falling from a window. The last person with her that day was Edward Durston. Police ruled it a suicide. No charges were ever filed. With Carol Wayne, the investigation went nowhere. Though U.S. consular officials suspected foul play, Mexican authorities closed the case as accidental drowning. No witnesses, no evidence, no one held accountable. And so Carol Wayne, the woman who once made millions laugh, died in silence in the cold, with no one fighting for justice on her behalf. Johnny Carson said nothing publicly, but for the following year, his Art Fern character, who had bantered with the Matinea lady for over a decade, vanished from the airwaves. It was perhaps his way of acknowledging, some deaths are serious, and some people should never be permitted to pass away so quietly. Carol Wayne, for example, never received an Emmy, has no star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, no wax figure in a museum, and no documentary about her was produced for decades. However, if you asked anyone who lived in America in the 1970s, who was the Matinea lady, they would remember. They'd smile, and then, after a pause, inquire in a lower voice, "Did she pass away?" Carol Wayne didn't need leading roles to be loved. In an era when television was simpler, she was the most familiar face of the week, not because she said anything profound, but because she was there, gentle, sexy, comforting, like a cocktail after work, like the laugh you needed to shake off a long, weary day. But that too was her tragedy. She wasn't remembered for who she really was, but for a role repeated endlessly. A character without growth, without depth, without a voice. She was the perfect model of the dumb blonde, a figure born to be the backdrop for someone else's punchline. And when times changed, that archetype was left behind. No one asked what Carol wanted to do, could do, or what she gave up to maintain that smile for 15 years. She once claimed, "I studied acting. I read books. I went to serious auditions." But Hollywood didn't see that. They only saw my chest. That was more than simply disappointment. It was a critique of a system that exploited women before discarding them when they no longer suited the public's tastes. Her death, which was inexplicable, unfair, and unheard, was the last evidence of that cruel silence. However, by going missing, she left behind an odd legacy that no one has been able to fully fill, because, although many women appeared on television after Carol, few ever brought the same blend of humor, sensuality, and vulnerability. Although Carol wasn't a particularly talented actress, she embodied a type of woman that Hollywood defined and then abandoned, making her more symbolic than any award could ever be. Today, when people re-watch the old Tonight Show sketches, they still laugh at Carson's sharp quips and the adorably slow reactions of the Matinee lady. But there is also a certain audience, older, quieter, who will remember that behind those stage lights stood a woman who reached the farthest edge of fame's loneliness. And for that reason, Carol Wayne, though never honored in the traditional ways, still lives on in the collective memory as an icon of beauty, of eraser, and of the stories Hollywood never dares to finish telling. When Carol Wayne's body was found in Manzanillo Bay, there were no major headlines, no public funeral, no farewells from the entertainment world. One of the most beloved faces on American television had left this world quietly, as if all her years of contribution were just a commercial that had ended and been flipped past. But if Carol Wayne were only a Matinee lady, then why, more than 40 years later, is her death still spoken of as an unsolved mystery? Perhaps because she was never just a beauty icon. She was a living metaphor for women defined by appearance, wounded by indifference, and forgotten by an industry that only loves in the moment. She stands as a reminder that behind the spotlight, there are still people waiting, aching to be seen, not just by the public, but by life itself. Carol Wayne isn't remembered through golden statues or classic film clips. She's remembered through empathy, through unanswered questions, through the silence her conflicted presence left behind. She lived in a role the world handed her, but her death and the silence that followed became the final performance that forces us to reflect on everything we once overlooked. What do you think about Carol Wayne's journey? Could it be that far too many in the entertainment industry and in life have lived and vanished just like her, with no one searching, no one asking, and no one remembering the right way? If you ever admired Carol Wayne or feel sorrow for what happened to her, write a comment stating "Rippy Carol Wayne" to show your love and remembrance. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next moving stories we present.